Alright my dudes, I'm Exelia and welcome to my channel. Come in, get comfy and let's chat about cosplay. Hi, I'm Heather and welcome to my channel. Today's video, it's kind of on topic at the moment because there's been a big buzz in the cosplay community about cosplay culture and influencer culture. If you haven't seen it, there was a thread started on Twitter by the user Sumikins. I will put the main thread on the screen here for you to read. There'll also be a link to it down in the description. And I want to read some excerpts from it because this has got a big conversation going about how cosplay culture and influencer culture are kind of melding together and what it means for the community. Is anyone else sick of watching cosplay culture morph into influencer culture? I am also, and I cannot emphasize this enough, really exhausted of meeting people who try to talk down to me because they assume since they don't know who I am, I can't possibly know anything. When did we transition from sharing online with the intent to bond and make friends to sharing online to cultivate an audience? I don't want watchers, I want friends. I also want to take a moment to say thank you to Sumikins because this conversation has been long overdue and really interesting. This is a much bigger topic than what I first anticipated, which is why I'm making this video, because I have a lot of thoughts and I thought it would be interesting to share some of those and discuss generally why I think cosplay as a hobby has changed and evolved over the years, and looking at the way that how we interact as cosplayers and how we talk to cosplayers and how we go to events and how we handle ourselves as cosplayers has also changed as part of that. This might sound really dumb, but imagine that the cosplay community is one great big pond, okay? And you've got loads and loads and loads of little fish in that pond, and that's fine. Nothing wrong with little fish, I'm a little fish. But the more time has gone on, you've gotten bigger fish entering the same pond and more exotic fish entering the same pond. People with different types of interests, bringing different things into cosplay. And we're all sharing the same space. It's the same space it always has been. It just has more interesting fish in it and bigger fish in it and some smaller fish in it and some fish from a totally different pond have decided to join. And the water has gotten so muddy that nobody knows what's going on anymore. So I don't necessarily think it's a problem that cosplay and influencers or any other types of cosplayers or how the culture itself has changed. I think it's wrong to assume that cosplay as a community is the same as it always has been. But because we're all expected to share the same pond and the pond doesn't get any bigger, it just gets more dense, it's harder to see who's who, what people are doing, what cosplay itself actually is. Now before I get into it, I just want to give a disclaimer that I don't think anyone in this is wrong. I've seen a lot of hate on both sides. I've seen people getting really critical of cosplay influencers saying that there's no place for them. I've seen influencers saying, well, you don't really understand what it is that we do, which fair point. I don't necessarily think anyone that is in this community, this great big pond, is in the wrong place. And that's what's so interesting about cosplay to me, because no two cosplayers are the same. Every single time you meet someone, they have a different experience of cosplay from you. You cannot cosplay the same way as anybody else. And when you meet different people who are doing different things, it inspires you to try different things as well. It's a really awesome, giving community, and the fact it is so diverse is a blessing, not a curse. So when I read a statement like, is anyone else sick of cosplay culture morphing into influencer culture, I'm like, I get where you're coming from, but I just don't think it's that simple. I think cosplayers of all varieties are equally as valid. I don't think it's necessarily a problem that there are people doing different things with cosplay all in the same community, but I think it's a little bit naive to think that cosplay is just gonna remain the same no matter what happens. And I don't want you to think that that's what I think about the original thread. It's far from that. I'm gonna get into things, but I do think that a lot of the points in the original thread are valid. I do think that the reason why they're valid is because this is a community that is constantly changing, and I don't disagree with the original thread, but I do think that it's more complicated than just influencer culture is ruining cosplay culture and they are morphing into one thing, because it's just not. So in my typical cringe fashion, I'm gonna insert a quote here, and that quote is by Bo Burnham from Make Happy. Social media is just the market's answer to a generation that demanded to perform. So the market said, here, perform.
perform everything to each other all the time for no reason. It's performer and audience melded together.
When I was making notes of this video, this quote really stood out to me, and not just because I'm obsessed with Bo Burnham, but because I think it's really relevant, because I think the rise of social media and the way that we use social media has had a direct influence on cosplay, because you had places on the internet to post about cosplay before, but they weren't accessible by everyone. The main reason why it's so interesting in cosplay is that cosplay as its nature is performative. The way that most cosplayers jumped onto things like Facebook and Twitter and then made a profile and then uploaded their pictures, etc., it's no longer confined to one audience, it's accessible by anyone with those platforms. And cosplay has become a much bigger thing in the last few years, and you can tell it's because of social media. So in case it isn't obvious, this is not a cosplay specific issue, but in this video I am going to be discussing the more cosplay specific nuances of it, because there's a lot of different things that have happened in the cosplay community in the last 15 years, and I have a lot of thoughts about them. So yeah, this video is mostly going to be touching on cosplay, but I just want to be blunt and say that it might feel like this is, you know, like the worst thing that's ever happened to cosplay. I can guarantee any other hobby, you would have a similar impact, because that's just what social media has done. It's been a huge global shift that has moved us from working within small communities to suddenly being able to access much larger communities. And of course, it's going to have an impact. You take something small and niche and, you know, typically confined to a forum, and then you put it on a global platform. You're going to have more people get interested in that thing, and it's going to change and it's going to evolve. I also think it's important to highlight that this is not a new thing. Like, influencers are not a new thing. Yeah, influencer is a relatively new term, but before you had influencers, you had big name fans, or BNFs. And it wasn't necessarily just that you were a fan of something, it would be that you were just a big name within a fandom or a community. There have always been the top cosplayers that people know, and that's just because they were big on the internet, and now if they've managed to turn that into influencing, then you look at big names like Yaya Han, and she has literally built a brand around cosplay, and she's sort of future-proofed it because she makes patterns, she makes materials, she has the Yaya Han brand. She's always been a popular cosplayer. Going back 10 plus years, I remember hearing Yaya Han's name. I remember seeing her in New Type. I remember seeing photographs of her online, and it's like, if she has had the goal to be able to put this forward and turn this into a brand, I applaud that. I think it's awesome. Kamui Cosplay, she started out small. She started out just doing it for the love of it, and now her and her husband work together as the Kamui Cosplay brand. They try and make informative content that people can really benefit from. And I mean, in recent weeks, there's been a lot of advertising, whether it's for like games or sponsored costumes or whatever, and I know that isn't necessarily to everyone's tastes. I'm a little bit like, again, but if that's how you're gonna have to secure things, and if you can also make informative, useful content alongside a sponsorship, then again, like, I can't help but appreciate that. Now, my third example is a little more controversial, and I've seen people place the blame on this individual for why cosplay is the way it is now. Let me just say that if this person had not rose to fame the way that she did, somebody else would have. To blame her specifically, narrow-minded, stupid, someone else would have come along. And that, of course, is Jessica Nigri, because she is the powerhouse that turned cosplay into sexy cosplay, turned it into fun cosplay. And you know, there were people doing what Jessica Nigri was doing at the same time. They just didn't do it the same way. While that isn't my kind of thing, like, it's not for me. I can still appreciate that she brought a different aspect to cosplay, and it made it more fun and accessible for a huge amount of people. But the important thing in all of this is that it's only possible because of the way social media has evolved. Through social media evolving and people being able to access this stuff so much easier outside of, you know, the little niche online communities that we once had, that's the reason why it's sort of popped off and exploded and evolved the way that it has. In order to understand where we are now, we've got to take a look back and see where cosplay on the internet first began. And honestly, I have such fondness for this time, so I understand why people get salty that it's not the same. But yeah, online communities for cosplay way back in the day, sort of like 2005 onwards, were quite small, quite meek. They were very wholesome, but they're certainly not the way that social media and like online communities work now. I began talking about cosplay on convention forums because in the UK, back in the day, about 2005, we had about 3 conventions a year, and you know, it wasn't much, but each of those conventions had a website, and on those websites they would have a dedicated forum, and on those forums you would have threads dedicated to different series, asking what people were going to cosplay, or you know, just generally chatting and getting to know each other. And that was pretty much where I made all of my plans and where I discussed all of my cosplay interests for a good 2-3 years. Around the same time, there was also dedicated cosplay websites, so places where you could make an account and then upload pictures and which costumes you'd made, and then talk on their forums about cosplay a bit more broad. So this was places like cosplay.com, there was Cosplay Lab, there was American Cosplay Paradise. In the UK we had Cosplay UK, very short-lived, Cosplay Island, there was QR Cos for the Japanese audience, and of course there were more than this, but I'm an English speaker so I didn't really use like the Italian or the German equivalent, so yeah, but you get the idea. There were different websites dedicated to cosplay. You could make your own gallery, you would have which costumes you'd made, you would then have a gallery of photographs of that costume, you could add different journals to discuss how you made different parts of the costume, and of course there was also a dedicated forum on most of these websites, so if you wanted to talk about specific types of series, or you wanted advice on different types of materials, or if you were going to a convention and you wanted to see if someone else on this website was also going to that convention, you could generally discuss things there. Over the years, I think I had an account on basically all of these websites. There's also more recent ones like World Cosplay, which replaced Cure, but man, it was a time, and I think anyone who has ever been active on these websites will also agree that it was like its own little time capsule. And there's still some around. I know cosplay.com is currently going through a bit of a resurgence, and also Cosplay Island, which is the UK based one, which is excellent. They've changed a little bit in the last few years, and it's still a great place to put up a full gallery, a full sort of portfolio of your costumes, to keep track of ways that you've made things. The websites are there, they're just not as popular as they once were. So back in the day, roughly when these websites were popping off, there was also another option that cosplayers could take, and that was to make their own personal website, like a dedicated personal website, your own domain, your own kind of gallery, your own whole thing. And I myself, I have my own website, which is exeliax.co.uk. A lot of upcoming big cosplayers decided, I want my own website, I want a little page where I can advertise myself, and if people want to book me, if they want to see what I've worked on, if they want to have a look through any of my portfolio, this is where they're going to do it. And the best thing about having your own website is that you didn't have as many limits as you did if you were using something like Cosplay Island, for example, where you could only have 8 photographs per costume. I didn't have to worry about any kind of limits. I could put as many characters as I wanted, I could put as many photos as I wanted, I could have them in whatever resolution that I wanted. So having my own website meant that if I wanted to, you know, put across a certain image, or if I wanted a certain aesthetic to my work, I was able to do that without it being confined to how a different website worked. And I would say for a few years that was pretty popular. I know in the UK specifically, from like the competitive scene, you know, where I'm from, there was definitely a period of a few years where pretty much everyone that was in the competitive cosplay scene had their own dedicated website. They had like an online portfolio, these are the costumes I've done, these are the awards that I've won, please look at my stuff. And some of those are still up. I mean, I still have mine. I founded mine thanks to competing. But yeah, a few of them have sort of died off a little bit. I know having your own dedicated website is kind of, I mean, I still like it. I still have mine. But for a lot of people, they feel like they don't necessarily need that as long as they have like a link tree that goes to their Instagram and their Twitter and their Facebook and stuff. So looking at social media, there are 4 main platforms that I'm going to discuss, and that is Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and TikTok, and the impact that each of those have had on cosplay, and how cosplay has sort of evolved and morphed and changed thanks to these platforms. So, skipping forward a few years, and this is the dawn of social media as it is now, because I think there's been a very gradual shift across cosplay with social media, and you can measure it by each platform. And I think most cosplayers who have been around for say like last 6 years or so are probably going to agree with this. You might disagree, if so, Let me know. I'd love to hear what you think. Like, genuinely, I would love to hear what you think. I've noticed across the years that the main catalyst for the way that cosplay has boomed and exploded and gotten so much more buzz and so much more interest is thanks to Facebook. And it's because when Facebook introduced pages, you were encouraged to make a page for basically anything. It wasn't just for businesses anymore. It was if you have a hobby, if you have an interest, if there's something that you want to share with the world but not on your main profile, you can put it on a page. And that's what cosplayers did, because it meant that rather than putting all of your cosplay content on your own feed that all of your family and friends were seeing, and sometimes it got a bit annoying, you had a dedicated space to do that. The difference is, instead of using something like a dedicated cosplay website like Cosplay Island, everyone could access this page. You could put this page up and then you could invite all of your friends to like it, and then randos could find it, and if you had cosplay in the title, anyone searching could find your page, as long as that was, you know, relevant to what you posted. So this in itself opened up cosplay as a very niche, small, happy little community, keeps to itself, to a great big audience, because anyone with a Facebook account could find your page and interact with your content, whether they were a cosplayer or not. And this, not a bad thing. I think it's really cool. It meant that so many people that had an interest in cosplay but ordinarily wouldn't have a reason to visit like a cosplay dedicated forum could suddenly interact with cosplay content. They could talk to people, they could ask questions, they could be interested in the thing that they've always been interested in. But now it was much easier to interact with that kind of content. It was also quite a gradual shift, because some of the complaints that I had about dedicated cosplay websites, if you wanted to upload multiple pictures for one costume, you could create a separate folder and you could put all of your pictures in there. You could have a progress folder where you put all of your progress. You could have a references folder where you put all of your references. It was a much easier format for a lot of people to manage what it was that they were doing. And with the addition of stuff like notes and just general posts and being able to interact with a much bigger audience, it changed the way that a lot of people interacted with cosplay. Which, I suppose, referring to the thread that inspired this, is kind of the beginning at the end. It's where the downfall started, because if you're gonna look at this as like, cosplay was doing just fine and then suddenly influencers, well, Facebook is where that started, isn't it? You had cosplayers who were popular and you had different platforms where you could talk to each other, but it wasn't one huge centralized platform where anyone could interact with you. That just was not a thing. And of course, it doesn't stop there, because what is Facebook without Twitter? Ah, it's now a hellscape. Once upon a time it was quite a nice place, but yeah, Twitter also kind of changed the game. I use pretty much the same handle everywhere on the internet, so I use either Exelia or ExeliaX if Exelia is taken, and that's just the title that I use everywhere. So naturally, most cosplayers, if you're going to sign up to something like Twitter, you're going to use your online handle, you know, the established thing. By using the same handle on something like Twitter, Twitter encourages you to share anything. It always has done. It's basically like, you have however many characters, what do you want to talk about? What do you want to vent? What do you want to discuss? What do you want to brag about? What do you want to talk about? What did you have for lunch? Like, you can post anything you want there at any time. Initially, most cosplayers would share what it is they're doing to do with cosplay. You didn't have a platform where you would talk about what you had for your lunch or what bus you got or any of these things alongside cosplay. Twitter changed that. Twitter changed it from you posting with intent to you posting anything. And so long as your cosplay title or your handle or whatever alias it was that you were using was attached to that, people who follow you for cosplay, you know, if that's what you're doing, then get to see a different glimpse of you. As you're working on something, you can update what you're doing in real time. You can share that with people. You can ask for critique. You can post something and say like, I'm working on this. What colour do you think looks better? And you can get real-time feedback, and you could never really do that before. Send a thought out, get a thought back. It was a much easier way to interact with people, either as cosplayers that you knew, that maybe you had already connected with, or with people who were just looking at your work. But because it's such an open platform, and because you could tweet about anything, it also kind of breeds parasocial relationships. If you're not familiar with the term parasocial relationships, I will put a summary on the screen somewhere. Basically, it's the kind of relationship that you get watching someone and feeling like you are their friend or you are connected to them, even if you've never met that person. Some of you watching might have a parasocial relationship with me. Because as you watch, it might be like listening to a friend, or you might be like, oh, I really like this cosplayer, I bet she's really canny, and you know, I would love to be a friend. If so, very sweet. But anyway, Twitter is a big breeding ground for that, because you can't possibly ever meet every single person that you speak to on Twitter. There's not necessarily anything wrong with that, it's just you need to understand boundaries. And boundaries is one of the problems with Twitter and social media in general, let's be blunt. Suddenly it goes from sharing something you care about on a small cosplay forum to anyone and everyone can have input on anything that you share. And that is kind of terrifying. So as an example, I know in the past that I've been working on props and accessories and different costumes and stuff, and sometimes I'll be like, which wig colour do you think looks best? And they give a couple of options. That's fine. I'm asking for input there. What I don't want is unsolicited feedback. And this is a big problem that I have dealt with, that most cosplayers that have ever been on social media have dealt with. I'll share something and I'm feeling good about it and I'm like, look at this progress, and then something happens that impacts that progress negatively, and my response is just, well, I'll not do it then. And I'm gonna be honest, it's one of the worst feelings where you've been working on something and you're really happy with it, and then suddenly you get this absolute, well, I liked it, but if someone else doesn't like it, what's the point in doing it? And when that's happening, that is bad. That is a bad thing. That is a bad thing. If I was posting that onto a cosplay forum and it was just, here's a bit of progress, people couldn't necessarily comment on that directly. They couldn't necessarily give you feedback on that directly. As soon as you put it onto a platform where people can interact with you immediately and they can give you any comment that they want immediately, it is going to have an impact on your perception of yourself. It's going to have an impact on what it is that you're doing. If people have commented and been like, oh yeah, this looks totally fine, I'm really excited to see the finished product, maybe I would have finished that piece. As it happens, I didn't finish that piece. I never ever touched it again after I was told, it looks fine, but isn't it too big? I literally could not finish the piece because I was like, well, if it's not gonna look right, what's the point? And isn't that just awful? Like, that makes me feel bad now. The more people would critique what it was that I was doing without me asking for it, the less willing I was to share anything. And I think that is the reason why people are less willing to share things, and the reason why some people are less happy with the cosplay community as a whole, because it went from being such a giving, wonderful community to being somewhere where you were going to be critiqued for anything that you did even slightly wrong, where it's like, ultimately, if you're wearing it, who cares if someone thinks it looks wrong? But now, if you put things onto a platform, you're going to be perceived by anyone, anywhere, who will have an opinion. So the next big platform is, of course, Instagram, which I'm a little conflicted about Instagram because I don't think it's necessarily a bad platform. I actually really enjoy using Instagram. It's a much nicer platform than somewhere like Twitter or Facebook is these days, but it's certainly not without its problems. And I hate to sound like I'm just repeating myself, but it's because it is shared with everyone, because there are so many people who will follow you now if you are a cosplayer where they are not necessarily cosplayers. You can have a huge audience of people who have never cosplayed in their life, and again, not a bad thing, but it's certainly not the same kind of community where it was so easy to share with fellow cosplayers. It's much harder to filter through and find other fellow cosplayers without just knowing who fellow cosplayers are, you know? I think Instagram is probably the closest platform to what the old school platforms used to be like, because you can have a gallery, you can sort of streamline what it is that you want people to see, and you don't necessarily have to post everything like you're encouraged to on places like Facebook and Twitter. So yeah, I mean, if you want to have something that's a bit more aesthetically pleasing and you want to put out a certain image for yourself, then Instagram's the place to do it, and for now it's kind of the best we've got. Yeah, and TikTok, I mean, I say this and I hate this, but I feel like I'm a bit too boomer for TikTok. Like, I can record videos like this all day long, but you get me to do some kind of... I absolutely not. No shade to anyone who enjoys it. I think it's a really cool platform if that is what you're into, but noisy, attention-grabbing stuff all of the time just really stresses me out, so it's not a platform for me. I know cosplayers now where literally The only thing they do is wear cosplay at home, record TikTok videos, take the cosplay off. They don't attend events, they don't make anything particularly unless it is for TikTok. I mean, that's really cool. Like, it's not for me, certainly not for me, but it's a really interesting new way to cosplay that is really accessible for a lot of people, because literally all you need is your smartphone and an app. The interesting thing about TikTok, and I think the reason why it's so popular with cosplayers and why it's getting so many more people into cosplay is, again, it's so performative. Put a costume on, you reenact something, or you dance, or you do anything, and then you put it online for people to watch and rewatch and then interact with and then collaborate with, or to reenact, or to keep doing different things with it. It is the most performative of any of the platforms that are currently popular. And again, it's not my kind of thing. I like making something, wearing something, getting a picture, and then that's it. But for people who really want to act and be seen and be a character and bring all of that fantasy to life, it's no surprise that it's popular. So earlier I was talking about how cosplay sort of changed and morphed thanks to social media. And aside from generally technology being accessible and these apps being, you know, somewhat addictive and encouraging people to share, I also think the main thing that has impacted a lot of cosplayers is the fact that likes are a currency. And I mean that very literally, because the more likes you have, the more people see something, the more likes you will garner, the more interest you will get, the more attention that you get. And getting attention and getting likes is a basic form of validation, because if you make something and then you post it online and you get, say, 50 likes from it, you know at least 50 people have seen that and they've thought, good job. Really like that. The more you get that, the more you want that. There's a phrase that I think is very relevant here, and that is, you are only as good as your last performance. And when likes are brought into that mix, it means that whatever number you hit on your last post, that is your benchmark, that is your goal. So if you post something and you get 50 likes, cool, good start. You post something after and you get 80 likes. Well, this is more popular than the last one. What did I do differently? And then the next one you post might get 40 likes and you think, well, this is tanking compared to the last one. What's wrong with it? And the reality is that quite often there's nothing wrong with what it is that you're posting. It just depends on who sees it, who interacts with it, who actually takes the time to double tap it when they're on their daily walk. It's not necessarily a problem with the content that you're posting, but you are tricked into thinking that it is. So with that in mind, we are always striving to do better than our last creation, than our last post. We want to get more numbers, we want to get more interaction, we want to get more comments, we want to get more likes. It's that kind of mentality that means that cosplay has gone from being a casual hobby that you do for fun to doing something that you are doing for attention of others. And I mean, cosplay is performative. You're wearing it and you want to be seen by people. That has always been the case. But now it's less about wearing something that you're happy with and just allowing people to see it. It's more about wearing something that you've made that you want to get positive reinforcement for. And this, I think, honestly, is where the root of the problem is, because it's not necessarily a problem with what people are doing or how people are making things or what it is that they're posting. It's that their understanding of cosplay and the cosplay community is changing around them, and they're not necessarily seeing how these changes are impacting the way that they look at their own hobby. And I know that sounds really big-headed to be like, oh, you're just not seeing it right. I'm not trying to be bigger than anyone else or to downplay this issue, because I have been within this problem myself and I've seen this have a negative impact on my own productivity. It's more that you need to take a step back, and if other people's validation of you is more important than what it is you're doing in your hobby, you need to remove yourself from that. You need to understand that you're doing this for yourself, and if people want to see it and want to interact with it, that's their prerogative, but you don't have to raise your own work on a pedestal to be seen by others. If you're confident and happy with what it is that you're doing, that should be enough, and you shouldn't be weighing up your success based in numbers and how people perceive your content. It's a huge thing within the cosplay community and the competitive cosplay community, is that certain cosplayers who are competitive, who go to do big international competitions, they can really make a name for themselves and they can use that as a platform to springboard and get noticed. But not everyone who competes reaches the same level. And people don't necessarily understand why that is. I think it comes down to personality, because if you're given an opportunity to be seen by masses and masses of people taking part in a competition, there is so much strategy in how do I remain memorable? How do I monetize this? How do I get people to notice this? How do I get people to remember me? And that plays into why some people are so much more successful than others. I personally have competed in 3 big international competitions. I have guest judged across the world. It's been really, really cool. I do not market myself as someone who has to be followed for upcoming content all of the time. I just kind of do my own thing and stay in my own lane, and I enjoy what it is that I do. But for some cosplayers who really hit the top, it's because they see an opportunity and they grab it with both hands. And just because they have more followers and more people interested in their work doesn't mean that they're actually any better than anyone else who competed with them, or anyone else in general, because entering a competition is a choice. If you enter a competition and you do well at that competition, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are inherently better than any other cosplayer who chooses not to compete. Everyone is doing things their own way. Once you realize that you can kind of split these things off, it makes it so much easier to be like, okay, doesn't really matter. On social media, yes, numbers are absolutely key, because numbers are the currency. The more you have, the better you are. But in real life, and within a hobby like cosplay, it does not measure how good you are at cosplay, because some of my favourite cosplayers have less followers than I do, and some of the people that I follow who have absolutely thousands and thousands and thousands, for a lot of people, their content isn't cosplay. They don't make their own costumes, they just have fun and crack on. It doesn't necessarily mean that someone with a bigger number is a better cosplayer. They're not going to have better construction than you. Some of them might have better construction than you, but they don't make as good videos as you. Like, none of this is measurable in the real world. The only place these numbers matter is on social media. Social media in itself promotes the idea that bigger is better. So yeah, of course, there's going to be some people who absolutely soar and they have massive numbers, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they are any more qualified than you are. And I say qualified in the sense that I have a lot of experience that people with hundreds of thousands of followers don't necessarily have. If I go somewhere as a guest pick, it doesn't mean that suddenly I'm not as good as someone with 100,000 followers. That's not how this works. And realistically, any event organizer will recognize that and understand that. One of the worst things about this hobby and the introduction of social media is that because likes are so important and because numbers and followers are so important, it impacts your own productivity. Because when you think, oh well, I don't want to post it because I didn't get that much interaction on my last post. That should not matter if you're doing something that you enjoy, and the fact that this has impacted myself and so many other cosplayers that I know is really disheartening. Ultimately, your self-worth shouldn't be measured by however many people interact with you online, but when you're so close to it, and this is how, I mean, for the last 2 years, people have interacted with each other, it's really difficult not to get tied up in numbers. It's more about recognizing when it is a healthy or an unhealthy relationship with social media, and when to step back and when to, you know, readjust and think about what it is that you're doing and how you enjoy your hobby, that you're able to switch things up and hopefully get a little bit more grounded. I remember there was a time period around 2010 where I used to get a bunch of fabric and I would lay it out and I would make an entire costume in like 3 days. And I never used to take that many progress pictures, and I never used to do any like makeup tests or anything. I would literally just get the fabric, lay it out, cut it out, sew it up, wear it. And I sometimes wonder, like, where did that energy go? Where did that oomph and that demand for me to just keep making things go? And I genuinely think that it's been impacted by the way that social media works, because now it's like, if you're not posting progress, are you even working on it? Social media has sort of cultivated this idea that everything you're making, you have to be sharing. Everything you're sharing, people have to approve of. And if people don't approve of that, or if they don't show a like on it, that impacts what you think about what it is that you're making. And that is such a dangerous mindset. Like, I can't even put it into words, but I feel like it's a mindset that a lot of cosplayers are going to relate to, because it's not as simple as I'm just going to make a costume and then wear it for a weekend, when you worry about so much public perception. And unfortunately, especially with the last 2 years, public perception is directly linked to how successful someone is in cosplay. Like, are you successful if you don't go viral? Are you successful if you don't get the voice actor commenting on your photo? Are you successful if it doesn't get retweeted by the official company? Like, Yes, you can still be successful without all of those things. You can still be successful just looking at something and thinking, I really like that. But that doesn't translate on social media, and people don't see your own satisfaction on social media unless you say it. It's so difficult to balance how you feel about something and how you're expected to feel based on how other people make you feel. My next point is that no cosplayer signed up to become their own social media manager, because that is what you effectively are if you're a solo cosplayer and you're uploading your own content. The system is rigged against you, and I'm just going to be blunt. If you don't know how to work the algorithm, which every social media platform has its own algorithm, and the algorithm is ever changing. The algorithm prioritizes stuff that gets interaction, and large cosplayers, large creators get the most interaction. So they're going to constantly get more and more interaction, and they're going to be seen at the top. Whatever is popular continues to be popular. Until you get popular, you're not going to be popular, and you just have to deal with it. And as I said, nobody wants to be their own social media manager for free, because each of these platforms has a different algorithm, and each platform you have to learn how the algorithm works. Some of them, if you post too often, that's not going to get seen. If you don't post often enough, that's not going to get seen. If you use this many tags, it'll get seen. If you use this many tags, it won't get seen. There's a lot of different variables. Who has time for that? I mean, if it's your actual job and you're trying to become a cosplay influencer, cool. By all means, research all of that, find out the ins and outs. That is what you're meant to be doing. But for a normal cosplayer, do you really want to have to spend ages Googling to find how to optimize your content so more and more people see it because that's just what you're expected to do? Not every single thing you post is going to be popular, but also not everything you post is going to be a flop either. It's just the way that social media works, and the fact that people are constantly striving to better and better and better when that is not how the system works is again a bit of an issue with constant validation. People want this, they want to be better than their last performance, and it's just, the more you strive for that, the harder it's going to be to achieve it. So moving past social media and all of the impact that it's had, what has it actually done to the cosplay community? I'm going to be honest, I think it's had a major impact on cosplayers. For all the reasons I've just explained, but also it's given people a much higher expectation of cosplayers and cosplayers of themselves. The line between cosplayer and content creator is so jagged and so wavy and so confused now that it's like, are you a cosplayer or are you a content creator? Because those two things are kind of one and the same, but they're also totally different. And this wiggly waggly line is different for everybody. Like, everyone's standards on what qualifies as cosplay and what falls as content is going to be different. So it's more of a personal preference kind of thing, and if someone wants to label themselves one way or another, I don't see a problem with that. All of these things are valid, and I think there's a space in the cosplay community for all of it, but it's up to you how you define it. For me, I'm a cosplayer and I also make cosplay content. So me recording stuff for YouTube and uploading little snippets here and there on Instagram, like, that is content creation from my hobby, which is cosplay. So I'm kind of both. Having a higher expectation for cosplayers is kind of a minefield, and there's a lot that falls into this, because not only do you have the pressure from outside, from other people expecting you to do certain things, there's also a pressure that you might put on yourself thinking, well, if I want to stay a cosplayer, then I need to do this and this and this. I think having a higher expectation for yourself is a good thing, because you can always strive to improve and you can always upgrade things, but sometimes you're pressured into improving. And this is where I think a lot of cosplay influencers actually have influence, because you have really big name cosplayers, for example like Kamui Cosplay, who has recently been doing a huge range of different sponsored content, and some of that sponsored content is with a laser cutter, some of it is with a 3D printer, with a resin printer, and the problem I have here is that a cosplayer like Kamui is gifted these tools to promote these tools, to show them to cosplayers. And that's great, it's cool, I like that. But you're then expected to use those tools. And as both a competitor and a judge, I've noticed a huge uptake in people using things like 3D printers, resin printers, and things like plotters and cutting machines. It's cool that this technology exists, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't mean that making something from scratch by hand is any less valid. Yet somehow cosplayers are now expected to have all of the top of the range tools. They're expected to have an industrial machine. They're expected to have all of these amazing tools all at once because that is what these influencers are displaying to them. And as someone who has been judged since the dawn of this happening, I was asked a couple of times, oh, this piece, why didn't you 3D print it? And it was almost as if the answer, I don't have a 3D printer, wasn't good enough. The piece that I made wasn't bad. It didn't look bad, it didn't look inaccurate, it didn't look messy, but I was asked, why didn't you 3D print this? As if that was the expectation. And that shouldn't be the expectation. It shouldn't be an expectation that any cosplayer who ever competes, who ever makes something to a competition standard, must have a specific type of tool. It's the same with things like airbrushes versus spray paint. I once judged on a panel with someone who was incredibly critical against using spray paint, and I was like, I use spray paint. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. This is a hobby. People are hobbyists. If spray paint is what they have access to, spray paint's what they're going to use. Just because there are alternatives doesn't mean that the option they're using is a bad option. It's that kind of expectation that in order to compete, or in order to be good, or in order to post the right kind of content, you have to have access to certain tools is really, really damaging and really unhealthy, because if this is a hobby that you're doing for fun and you want to do your hobby in a way that you find fun, there shouldn't be an expectation of, well, you have to buy a £600 machine to have fun. And I know that sounds really critical, and I am critical of it, but I'm only so critical of it because this is an expectation that seems to be getting more and more popularity, and it's like, just because you don't have the best tools does not mean you are less of a cosplayer, it doesn't mean you are a worse cosplayer, it doesn't mean that you are less skilled. So thanks to social media and the fact that everyone sees everything all of the time, there's a much higher pressure on cosplayers, and this is something that is expected by both their audience and also their peers and also themselves. And there is so much more comparison that's going on that it's making it difficult not to feel pressure. There's pressure to have the newest, most up-to-date resources. There's a pressure to have the newest tools. There's a pressure to be the first cosplayer of that series on this platform. There's a pressure to be better than everybody else, even if you're not competitive. There's a pressure to improve, even if you don't want to. There's a pressure to document everything, a pressure to film everything, a pressure to share everything. There's a pressure to make tutorials, there's a pressure to make patterns. There's a pressure to monetize your hobby, there's a pressure to sell prints, there's a pressure to do commissions, there's a pressure to start a Patreon. There is so much pressure on social media to be the best at what you're doing and to constantly be updating and to be the most active and to get the most likes and to be the most involved in your hobby, when ultimately it's just that. It's a hobby. And this isn't exclusive to cosplay, once again. There are so many different ways that this is a problem in so many different hobbies. So while there are higher expectations for cosplayers, it's more about how you view yourself and what higher expectations you want to give yourself, because if you give in to peer pressure for people on social media, you will never ever be good enough. And I'm gonna be perfectly honest, I've been enjoying doing this YouTube thing. I'm a little less consistent than I wanted to be, but it's hard. It's not hard switching on a camera and doing stuff. That's fine, but trying to document everything that I do in making a costume, every single part of the process, is really hard, and it's not necessarily something that you can just do easily, which I think a lot of people expect it will be. When I work on stuff, I normally spend most of my time sat on the floor in my underwear, trying things on, pinning myself into things. And if I'm going to document the whole process of how I make something, I can't do that. I feel like I have to have a nice face of makeup on and maybe some shapewear, and I have to be really careful about my posture because I don't want this to look bad on camera, and I have to be careful about what I say, and I have to not pick my nose, and you know, you have to be so careful because that is how you are going to be perceived. And sometimes I just don't want to be perceived. Sometimes I just want to sit around in my pants and cut out some fabric and not worry about, does this angle look alright? Because sometimes I just want to kick back, I want to put music on, and I just want to work on stuff. I think it's really fun to make things and upload it, and I love sharing stuff online. Like, that's one of the main things that I enjoy about cosplay, is that I can show people how I do things. But the expectation that any time I want to sit and work on something, I have to rig up the camera and I have to rig up the lights and I have to get myself ready, I just can't do that every single time. One of the points that really stood out to me in the original post was that meeting someone, they might underestimate what you actually know. They might think that you know nothing because you don't have a large following. And I think this is probably the worst thing about cosplay and influencing and how it's kind of merging into one, because I think most cosplayers don't actually care what your following is. They might be impressed if you got a big number, but most cosplayers are kind of on the level. Like, they're all kind of buying from the same field. Like, we don't have huge numbers, and we don't really care if we get them. We just do it because we enjoy it. I don't meet people and think, oh well, you've got less than 1,500 followers, so I'm superior to you. Like, are you having a laugh? No. And I can understand that someone who's at the top of their game won't necessarily want to mingle with someone who can't benefit them, because social climbing is a thing. Yeah, there will be a minority of people who will look down upon you, but they wouldn't care about what skills you have in the first place if they're only looking to social climb. I'm sure most of you will know this anyway, but social climbing basically is influencer of smaller size collaborates with influencer of larger size to try and get more numbers from influencer of larger size. And then they consistently collaborate with bigger people to get more numbers. Social climbing. If someone's gonna judge you and be like, oh, as soon as they see that you don't have a large following, they probably weren't going to add any value to your life in the first place if they're going to look at things that shallow. It does bother me though that so many events will hire guests based on their numbers, because realistically, the more followers and likes you have, the more money you're likely to make for an event. So if they're going to pay to fly you out and have you there as a guest, they want to know that they're able to make money off you being there, because that's how business works. But I do disagree where you have guests that go over to events and they are introduced to judge competitions, because realistically most cosplayers who are cosplay influencers who do not make their own costumes or who commission costumes or whatever, again, no shade against that, that's cool, but you should not be judging a cosplay competition if you do not make your own costumes. It is as simple as that. I am not a fan of competitions that get big name cosplayers to come and judge, where the big names don't know how to sew, or they don't know how to make armour, or they don't know their arse from their elbow, but they know how to sell prints. If you're an organiser, do not get people like that to judge your competitions, because if anything, you're just going to drive away people from wanting to enter. Because if I see someone judging a competition and I'm like, they've never picked up a needle in their life, there is no point in entering this competition because they will not know how to judge the entries, I will avoid the competition. And I know other people who have avoided competitions for the same reason. You're giving your competition a bad reputation, and that is not something that you want. But aside from that, if you want to get guests in that are going to make money, that are going to get numbers, that are going to be popular, then do get cosplay influencer guests. Whether they make costumes or not, I think it's really cool that you can have a guest that is literally just a cosplayer at an event, and that is profitable for events. But yeah, just don't let them judge the competition, please. Another point on the original post is fans or followers versus friends. Because this is a big issue that I've noticed for myself, is that I cosplay to meet people and to make friends, and I have no problem with people following me and whatever, but I've definitely had a couple of near misses with people where they follow me and they interact with me and suddenly they're inviting themselves over to my house, which is not okay. Again, it feeds into the idea of a parasocial relationship, that just because we met at an event and we talk briefly online does not mean that you are welcome in my house or that I regard you as a friend. If you know nothing about me besides what I post publicly on social media, I don't think that we're friends. And sometimes getting that across to people is very, very difficult. But at the same time, I find it difficult to make friends now, because we're all kind of in the same community and we all see each other's content, but we don't know anything deeper than that. And I understand with the original post that it's like, I want to make friends, not have followers, because the sense of community that once was within cosplay and within cosplay communities is totally different now, where it's, unless you meet at an event and you really strike it off and then you decide to talk afterwards, it's so difficult to make new friends the way that we used to. I don't think it's a problem for like newer generations because they just do things differently, but again, speaking as someone who's been cosplaying for 15 years, I find it very difficult to strike up conversation and just have a normal conversation that develops into a friendship with people now, because the expectations are so different. And again, I think it's just a shift in the hobby, because there's nothing wrong with having fans or followers and friends at the same time. And for me, again, with the weird kind of parasocial issues that I've had with people in the past, having followers is a great distinction, where it's like, if you follow me instead of if you're my friend, because I find the distance between the two things very comforting, where if I'm not comfortable sharing something with followers, I choose not to share it. I'm a lot more careful with what it is that I post online and how open I am online. Whereas before, I would share a lot of different things, people would get to know me a bit better, and it led to really uncomfortable situations. Now I've got a bit more distance and I'm like, okay, would I feel comfortable showing this to friends? Yes. Do I feel comfortable showing this to strangers? No. It's easier for me to sort of self-edit and know what to put online that isn't going to bite me in the ass later. But I will say, I do find it really weird when you get creators or cosplayers where they're like, oh, what should my next costume be? And they give like a poll or a couple of options. And then whatever wins is literally what they wear next. Because for me, I make things that I want to make and that I want to wear, that I'm putting my own hard-earned money into and my own effort into. If I put up a poll and they pick the thing that I don't want to make, I'm not going to make it, so I'm just not going to put up the poll. And this kind of weird interaction where it's like fans get to choose what it is that you do, I find so alien to me. Again, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think if that's what you want, and if it's like, I'll put up 4 popular choices and then whichever one gets the most votes is the most popular, so I'll do that and then I'll get more content out of that. Smart move. I get why you're doing that. It's just not for me, and I think for a lot of other cosplayers it's also not for them. When I see this kind of behavior, I'm like, you do you. I also think it's interesting that certain cosplayers, especially those who are, you know, trying to become cosplay influencers, will focus on specific brands or specific costumes or specific characters because they want to pander to a brand. And whether that's because they already have a sponsorship, or if it's something where they're aiming to get a sponsorship and they know that this kind of company usually sponsors cosplayers or they've worked with cosplayers in the past, that can influence their decisions. So sometimes it's difficult to tell with certain influencers and certain cosplayers where their priorities lie. Like, are they making this costume or buying this costume or wearing this costume because they actually like the character, or are they wearing it purely to get the attention of someone who is going to sponsor them to wear it more often? I think that's such a weird dynamic, and again, it's nothing that I would do, but I respect if people want to do that, and I understand that if that's where the money is and that's how you're going to get the interest, then again, you do you. On that note, I do think it's cool when brands work with cosplayers, and I wouldn't say that I worked with a brand because I didn't get paid for it, but I did work with Namco Bandai at a couple of events at Japan Expo, where basically myself and a bunch of other Tales of cosplayers that I knew from all different countries would come together at Japan Expo, and to get in we basically got like a free badge and like a goodie bag and stuff, but we weren't actually paid to be at the event, so there was no like monetary gain or anything like that. As a fan of that series, who has been a fan for a long time, it was so flattering to be invited along as part of a group of cosplayers. So sometimes when you get people working with different brands, it's not necessarily because, oh, I've been paid to do this and I don't really care about the series or anything like that. Sometimes, and especially in my case, it was just, I really loved the game and I was given a really cool opportunity. So the inclusion of cosplayers and having cosplay-centric events from things like big companies or brands or franchises, I think is absolutely awesome. And if you get selected to do something like that, and if you're able to monetize that and get some kind of recompense for it and also have a really good time, like, I can't blame anyone for doing that. I think it's really cool. And it's important to recognize that without influencers, none of that would have happened, because companies didn't start working with individuals. They didn't work with people that were just, oh, a bit famous on the internet, until they realized how much influence those people had. If a company sponsors a cosplayer to play their video game and show that to their audience, I don't see anything wrong with that. I think it's a way to diversify content and to get it to reach new people that wouldn't exist without conventional influencers. One of the final things I want to discuss is monetization. And of course, when you're an influencer, you make money off what it is that you promote. And monetization in cosplay is something that is so broad and so vast and so varied that I think it's really interesting to discuss whether monetizing cosplay and being a cosplay influencer are kind of one and the same thing, or whether there are different degrees to this and what people think is acceptable and what people think is influencing. So firstly, I think monetization gets a really bad rap because people think if you're making money from your hobby that you're exploiting your hobby in some way, and I don't necessarily think that that's the case. There are some amazing creators online where they produce patterns or they produce 3D print models, or where they provide a service online where they're giving information back to the community. And of course you've got things like selling prints or books or merchandise, which is also pretty cool. There are also ways that you can get creative with it. So for example, this is the best example I can possibly pluck, Be More Shonen by Cosplay Mini, because he runs a service where he literally gives a workout plan and tutoring to people who want to better themselves through the power of shonen anime. I'm not kidding. It's wild. And the fact he's managed to make this into a successful business is just mind-blowing to me. But I will say, as a cosplayer who's been around for a long time, it gets exhausting when people tell you you have to monetize your hobby. Because, yeah, honestly, if it was easy to make money from this hobby, everybody would be doing it. It's not that easy. The idea that, oh, well, you just need to talk to a company and get sponsorship. Right, because if you email every single company, someone's gonna bite. No, that is not how it works. There are literally thousands upon thousands of cosplayers who would die to work with a company. How many emails do you think those companies get? How many emails do you think they say yes to? It's not a very big number. Being told to monetize your hobby and, oh, you're so good you can make money off this, is not necessarily the compliment that people think it is. Because yeah, it's a lovely compliment that you think it's good enough that you could make a living off it. That is a wonderful compliment, but it really limits your productivity, it limits your mindset, it makes you think so critically about everything that you're doing. When you're first starting out and if this is still just a hobby and you're still just enjoying it, the thought of, well, I should change what it is that I'm doing, or, well, I need to do commissions instead of making my own work, and my own work is the thing that I enjoy, it can be really, really difficult to battle with that. So sometimes when you're looking at something and you're like, wow, this is great, you should sell this, maybe think about it. It is a nice compliment, but not everybody wants to hear it. And again, this is not exclusive to cosplay. I recently started another hobby. I started painting garage kits, and I painted one kit. I painted one kit. And someone messaged me and literally said, hey, you could sell these. What if I don't want to? What if I just want to enjoy my hobby? I have other hobbies, I have other things that I want to do. I have Netflix that's waiting for me. It shouldn't be an expectation for every cosplayer that is ever asked to sell something, to sell something. And I hate the logic that if you're not monetizing your hobby that you're clearly not good at it, because that is such a stupid thing to think, where yes, you can be good at something, you can enjoy something, you can be incredibly skilled at something and still just want to enjoy it. You can do something and not want to win awards for it. You can do something and not want to compete in it. You can do something and just do it because you enjoy it. And this concept seems to baffle some people. But anyway, I think it's really cool that even though cosplay, influencing, the merge of those two things, it's been very strange and it's been hard to adapt to. I think it's awesome that so many people are actually able to make a business and make a living off doing something that they love so much, that they get opportunities that didn't exist before because influencers have allowed them to have those opportunities. I think it's a really, really cool thing that's happening at the moment, and I look forward to seeing what happens with influencing within cosplay in the next few years. I think the more cosplay influencers get into this kind of creative space and have more to offer, the better the community is going to be. Let's talk about products and advertising, because this is something that I don't necessarily think is great about influencers, because I follow a lot of influencers. I'm just going to be transparent. Follow a lot of makeup influencers, not necessarily just off on a jaunt influencers, but people who talk to me about what makeup is good and what skincare is good and that sort of thing. I like to learn and I like to see what people get invested in. I have found so many different products that I really enjoy based on recommendations from influencers, and I think it is as valid a job as any other job if you can make it work. Problem I have is with product endorsement, because in cosplay specifically as a hobby, product endorsement normally came from genuine recommendation. So cosplay is a hobby where people share information very, very freely. So for example, on my website, I have a little gallery. I've got a bunch of different costumes on there, and one of the things that I have listed is what wig I'm wearing. I try my best to include where it is from and full credit to where I got my wig from. I do that without any kind of payment, without any kind of request. I just do it because, well, someone might find it helpful. Because there's been endless amounts of times where I've looked at someone's wig in a costume and I'm like, I wish I knew what colour it was. I wish I knew where that was from. For me, it's just a natural thing that whenever I post something, whether it's on my website or if it's on Instagram or anything, I will credit where my wig is from and give as much information as possible. That's just what you do in this hobby. You share information because it makes it so much easier for people to get started or to do something similar. The issue is that it's gone from genuine recommendation to who is being paid for their opinion. And I know that sounds really like it sounds really bad, but it's true because there's so many cosplayers now where they work with these brands and they promote these brands, and it's like, are you tagging this because it's promoting the brand because you're expected to, because that's in a contract? Or is it because you genuinely love the product? At the very least, in the UK, you have to disclose if you receive something as a gift or if it's part of a sponsorship or if you're being paid to promote something. You have to disclose if it is an advert. This isn't necessarily the case everywhere in the world. Most places it is now, especially if it's something online, but not everyone's going to be honest. Sometimes it just doesn't feel genuine, you know? And sometimes I get very skeptical because I see creators get given something like a resin printer and they're singing all these praises about how great it is and all these different features that it has. And I think to myself, as a pessimist, I'm like, are you only saying that though because it was given to you for free? Because if someone gave me a free resin printer, I would be like, yes, it's amazing, because it was free. Whereas if I'd done my own research and been like, okay, which resin printer is best for me? What resin printer is going to give me this kind of result? I want this and that and whatever in a resin printer. Would I have bought a different one? Are these people promoting products that are genuinely the best, or are they promoting it because that was the company that approached them with a sponsorship? So much of influencing and so much of, I have a discount code and an affiliate code, is making money. It's not necessarily about what is actually best for the audience. I know that sounds really bad, and it is really bad, but I just think that way now because I've seen so many different collaborations and promotions where it is so disingenuous, and I'm like, if I was going to be spending hundreds of pounds on a plotter or a cutting machine, I wouldn't just buy the one that someone on Instagram told me to buy. I would have to do my own research because I just need to know that I'm not wasting my money. And on that note, there have been issues in the past where companies that have been sponsoring influencers, whether it is within cosplay or in other hobbies, where it has literally been in their contract that they cannot promote or display or discuss rival products, and they have to delete critical comments or comments that mention rival products. And it's like, well, if that's in your contract and that's what you've been told that you have to do, that's not a good look for you or the company. These influencers are not your friend, and if they have an affiliate code and that is going to get them paid, they are going to promote that more than an honest opinion. They're going to promote an opinion that is going to get you to buy the product because that is what pays their bills. If you're an influencer and you're offered different deals, try and do something that you genuinely believe in. Don't just take a product deal because it's going to give you however much money in the bank, because if you start taking product deals that people are not going to believe and they're not going to, you know, want to interact with, that is going to tarnish your reputation. It's also difficult to tell who is promoting something because they've been sponsored, who is promoting something because they genuinely love the product, and who is promoting something because they want a sponsorship. Yeah, that's my little soapbox about product placement and advertising, because I don't like wasting my money, and I don't think other people should waste their money either. And if you want genuine reviews, be an informed consumer. Don't just buy stuff blindly. It will not do you well. And with all that said, that's all the points that I had to cover in this video. But I just want to go over a couple of things because I clearly have a lot to talk about on this subject. I think social media and cosplay and influencing is kind of a little melting pot. And I don't necessarily think that it's a bad thing. I think if anything, it's only going to get better from here because things are going to continue to diversify and there's going to be a lot more space for a lot more cosplayers. In case it wasn't obvious enough, I don't think there's anything wrong with cosplay influencers. And as I was saying before, no two cosplayers are the same, and the same goes for cosplay influencers, because there are so many people that I follow where they now fall under the influencer category. And some of them don't make their own costumes, some of them just buy costumes, some of them have friends who they commission costumes from and they work together and they collaborate and they get a little bit back off that. And there's some cosplayers where they make pretty much all of their costumes and they document it and they sell guides to it, and I think that's awesome. And they are still influencers. Not every single influencer is going to be exactly the same. I honestly think that most people just need to take a step back and reevaluate why they're doing their hobby and how they're sharing their hobby, because for a few years I was very, very embroiled in the idea that I had to be popular and that everything I made had to be well received, and it was like, that's not who I am though, and that's not what I enjoy doing. I make obscure rubbish, so normally I am not fazed by other people's opinions, but for a while I was fazed by it, and I honestly think I was just too close to the situation, because I had a few different posts that got noticed by companies and retweeted and shared, and I got followed by the official Tales of account, and I was like, ooh, that's exciting. But it didn't change what I was making, it didn't change what I wanted to make, it didn't change my opinion of how to make a costume, it didn't change the way that I was going to share anything. My little phase of wanting to be noticed and making things to be noticed was very, very short-lived, and I'm so thankful for that. Ultimately, I don't really care about wanting attention for what it is that I do. I would prefer to do things that make me happy and know that I'm happy with them than try and pander to an audience that I never cared to get. Which I realise is kind of ironic considering I'm sat here talking to a camera to an audience. But yeah, it's just one of those things where it's like, the more you think about it, the worse it gets, so just don't think about it and just enjoy it for what it is, and hopefully you will find some peace in that. Anyway, I should probably round this video off. It has been quite a long one, so if you sat through all of it, then thank you. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you found it interesting. If you've got any other opinions on this or any thoughts or any kind of anecdotes, like please, please, please leave them down below, because I would love to discuss this with more people, because where it was popping off on Twitter, I was like living for every thread that I could find. Our approach to cosplay inherently has changed and I just find it fascinating. So yeah, if you've got any thoughts, just pop them down below. I would absolutely love to read them, and if you want to chat to me on Instagram or Twitter, you can also find me there. But yeah, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a thumbs up, because that really helps with the algorithm, you know, tricksy algorithm. And if you haven't already and you would like to join me for some more cosplay chatter in the future, please do subscribe and hit the bell to be notified every time I upload a new video. Normally I upload videos every couple of weeks, but I've been a little off the wagon recently. But there will be more stuff coming in the new year and onwards, so if you want to stick around for that, please do. As always, thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you very, very soon.